The alarm at Forward Operating Base Epsilon blared at 0500 hours, just like it had every morning for the past 14 months. Sergeant Maya Foster rolled out of her narrow bunk, her muscled arms already reaching for the extra 20 pounds of ballistic plates she'd been ordered to carry as conditioning, while other soldiers trained with standard gear. At 28, she moved with the mechanical precision of someone who'd learned that drawing attention meant inviting more punishment. What her commanding officers didn't know, what no one at the base knew, was that those extra plates, meant to break her spirit, would one day save the lives of her entire squad when an artillery shell exploded in the wrong place at the wrong time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Serrano Valley was unforgiving, a dusty hellscape of jagged mountains and hidden ravines where temperatures soared above 110 degrees even in the shade. The outpost itself looked like something cobbled together from spare parts, prefab buildings connected by gravel pathways, reinforced bunkers that rattled when the desert winds hit just right, and communication towers that constantly needed repair from sandstorms and occasional enemy mortar fire. Maya's reflection in the spotted mirror showed the same face she'd worn for months. Auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it gave her headaches, 5 feet 7 inches frame that looked deceptively slender despite the hard muscle beneath her uniform, and eyes that had learned not to expect fairness from anyone. Her shoulders bore the evidence of her daily burden, calluses and bruises from the extra plates she'd been forced to carry since the incident at Ranger School. "Foster!" The voice cut through the morning air like a knife. Captain Reynolds stood in the doorway of the equipment room, his massive frame blocking most of the light. His mustache, which he claimed hadn't been trimmed since Bush was in office, twitched with barely concealed disgust. "Those supply manifests better be perfect when I inspect them at 0800, and I mean perfect, not your usual half-assed excuses for paperwork." She didn't respond. 14 months of experience had taught her that any reaction would only make things worse. Instead, she nodded once and returned to her workstation where stacks of inventory reports waited for the obsessive verification that had become her signature. Each form would be checked 3 times, every number confirmed with a precision that would make an accountant weep. "You know what your problem is, Foster?" Reynolds wasn't finished. He never was. "You think you belong here with real soldiers, but pushing papers and carrying extra weight ain't the same as leading troops into combat. Good thing, too, we'd all be dead if we depended on you making decisions when it mattered." The other soldiers in earshot chuckled right on cue. It was the same performance every day, with slight variations in the script. Sometimes it was about her size, sometimes about her gender, always about her failure at Ranger assessment, the one black mark on her record that followed her everywhere like a shadow. What they didn't know, what nobody at the outpost knew, was that Maya Foster had been trained by Colonel Elizabeth Harrington, the woman who'd revolutionized tactical response protocols for the entire military. The instructor so selective that she'd only accepted 5 mentees in her entire 25-year career. For 3 years, Maya had been her star pupil, learning techniques that most officers couldn't even comprehend, let alone execute. But that was before Ranger School. Before, Major Daniels had deliberately given her faulty equipment during her final assessment. Before the official report that made her leadership failure sound like a character flaw instead of deliberate sabotage. Before her dreams of becoming a tactical operations officer died in a spray of missed objectives and bureaucratic indifference. Now she was furniture, useful, invisible furniture that managed supply chains so the real soldiers could focus on operations. As Reynolds walked away, already shouting at some other unlucky soul, Maya continued her work. Her movements were methodical, almost meditative. Check the ammunition counts, verify the medical supplies, inspect the communications equipment. Each action performed with a precision that would have impressed her old mentor if anyone cared to notice. The morning sun was climbing over the eastern peaks when she finished the last manifest. 27 supply categories, each one checked to specifications that exceeded military standards. She'd been at it for 3 hours, her back aching from hunching over the workbench, her shoulders raw from the extra plate she'd been ordered to wear even during administrative duties. But every manifest was perfect, not because anyone would appreciate it, but because lives depended on supplies that arrived where they were needed, when they were needed. "Hey, Foster." The voice was different this time, younger, less hostile. Corporal David Mitchell, barely 24 and still green enough to believe that competence mattered more than politics. He was one of the few who didn't actively participate in the daily mockery, though he never spoke up against it either. "Command wants to see you." Maya's stomach dropped. Being summoned to the command center usually meant one of two things: extra duty or disciplinary action. Given that she hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't done anything at all except manage inventories and stay invisible, it was probably the former. The command center was housed in the sturdiest building on base, its concrete walls thick enough to withstand direct artillery hits. Maps covered every surface, showing the contested valley below where insurgent forces had been probing their defenses for weeks. Radio equipment chattered constantly with traffic from other outposts, creating a background noise that never stopped. Major Wilson looked up from a stack of reports when she entered. At 42, he was old enough to have seen real combat, young enough to still believe the military was a meritocracy. His weathered face bore the kind of scars that came from leading from the front, and his eyes held the weary patience of someone who'd learned that good soldiers came in all shapes and sizes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Foster, we've got a situation developing," he gestured to the tactical display where red markers showed enemy positions in the valley. "Intelligence indicates increased activity along the southern approaches. We need all hands on deck for enhanced logistics support." She nodded, waiting for the assignment. Probably another 12-hour shift of inventory management, while pretending she couldn't coordinate tactical operations better than half the officers who were assigned actual command duties. "You'll be on Outpost Delta starting tomorrow," Wilson continued. "It's got the most critical supply needs with the least margin for error, nearly 200 troops rotating through a forward position with minimal support infrastructure." He paused, studying her face. "I know you've got the eye for details, Foster. We need someone who won't miss anything important when it comes to resource allocation." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. In the bizarre ecosystem of military hierarchy, being assigned to the most critical outpost meant someone somewhere thought she was competent. It was the closest thing to recognition she'd received in 14 months. As she walked back to the supply room, Maya allowed herself a moment of something that might have been hope. Outpost Delta was equipped with advanced tactical operations equipment and served as a hub for regional patrols. She'd finally have access to the kind of strategic environment she'd trained for under Colonel Harrington. Maybe, just maybe, she'd get a chance to prove that she was more than just a glorified clerk with a uniform. She didn't know that in less than 72 hours, Lieutenant Colonel Parker's patrol would be trapped in an ambush 2 clicks away with no qualified tactical officers available to coordinate an extraction. She didn't know that her forgotten skills would be the only thing standing between 30 soldiers and certain death. She didn't know that the extra plates she'd been forced to carry as punishment would save lives in ways no one could have anticipated. But as she settled back into her routine of checking inventories and being invisible, something had shifted. For the first time in months, Maya Foster felt like she might actually belong somewhere, even if that somewhere was a dusty outpost on a forgotten mountain, watching over supplies for soldiers who thought she was worthless. Tomorrow would prove her wrong about many things, but tonight, for just a few hours, she allowed herself to hope. The mess hall at 1,800 hours was exactly what you'd expect from a military outpost built on a shoestring budget. Fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, plastic tables scarred by years of abuse, and the persistent aroma of reheated MREs that had seen better days. Maya sat alone at the corner table she'd claimed as her own, mechanically working through a beef stew that tasted like cardboard and regret. "Did you hear about Foster's new assignment?" The voice carried clearly across the nearly empty hall. Lieutenant Jason Cooper, a 27-year-old from Georgia whose main qualifications seemed to be an endless supply of crude jokes. "They're putting her at Outpost Delta. Guest Command finally found the perfect job for someone who can't lead, counting supplies while other people do the real work." The laughter that followed was predictable, like a bad sitcom laugh track. Maya kept her eyes on her tray. counting the pieces of what might have been carrots floating in the brown liquid that passed for gravy. She'd learned long ago that reacting only fed the beast. "I heard she almost made it through Ranger School," said Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, Cooper's ever-present sidekick. Almost being the key word. Apparently her squad mutinied during the final exercise because she couldn't make a simple tactical decision. More laughter. Maya's grip tightened imperceptibly on her plastic spoon, but her expression never changed. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that her failure at Ranger School had been orchestrated. Major Daniels had made sure she didn't make the cut, not because she lacked skill, but because she had too much of it. "Weight-carrying Foster," Cooper continued, clearly enjoying his audience. "That's what they called her at Ranger School. Heard she cried when they washed her out." That was the part that stung the most. Not because it was cruel, but because it was completely fabricated. She hadn't cried. She'd stood at attention while Daniels delivered his verdict, accepted it with military bearing, and walked out with her head high. But the truth had never been as entertaining as the fiction. "Leave it alone, Cooper." The voice came from the serving line, where Specialist Marcus Wright was loading his tray with the same questionable stew. At 29, Wright was older than most of the enlisted men, a former EMT who joined the Army after his third tour as a civilian contractor. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the soft-spoken manner of someone who preferred saving lives to taking them. "What's that, Doc?" Cooper's tone turned nasty. Wright's medical background made him another favorite target, though not as popular as Maya. "You defending your girlfriend?" "I'm suggesting you find better ways to spend your time than harassing fellow soldiers," Wright replied calmly, carrying his tray toward Maya's table. "We're all on the same team here." "Yeah, well, some team members are more useful than others." Cooper's voice followed him across the room. "At least you can handle emergency medicine without freezing up. Foster can't even... Can't even what?" The new voice cut through the mess hall like a blade. First Sergeant Jameson stood in the doorway, his 26 years of service evident in every line of his weathered face. At 54, he was the oldest soldier on the base, a veteran of conflicts most of the younger troops couldn't even pronounce. His presence commanded immediate respect, not because of his rank, but because everyone knew he'd earned every stripe the hard way. Cooper's cocky grin evaporated. "Nothing, Sergeant. Just talking." Talking, Jameson's expression suggested he knew exactly what kind of talking had been going on. "Cooper, Rodriguez, you're both on extra duty tomorrow. Perimeter patrol at 0400. "But Sergeant..." 0400 sharp. Jameson's tone broke no argument. "And Cooper, next time I hear you running your mouth about a fellow soldier's service record, you'll be scrubbing latrines until your hands are as raw as your mouth is loud." The mess hall fell silent except for the eternal hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of wind howling through the mountain passes. Cooper and Rodriguez exchanged glances but knew better than to push their luck with Jameson. They finished their meals in sullen silence and left without another word. Wright settled into the chair across from Maya, his presence welcome but unexpected. "Mind if I sit?" She shrugged, not trusting her voice. Kindness was so rare in this place that she'd almost forgotten how to respond to it. "I was at Fort Benning when Colonel Harrington was still teaching," Wright said quietly, stirring his stew without eating it. "Heard she only took on special students, the kind who could do things with tactical operations that most people wouldn't believe." Maya's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Nobody was supposed to know about Harrington. She'd kept that part of her background carefully hidden, knowing it would only make the mockery worse if people knew she'd trained with a legend and still failed at Ranger School. "I also heard," Wright continued, his voice so low it barely carried across the small table, "that sometimes the best soldiers don't make it through schools for reasons that have nothing to do with their abilities." Their eyes met for the first time, and Maya saw something there she hadn't expected: understanding. Not pity, not curiosity, but the recognition of someone who'd seen enough military politics to know that talent and advancement didn't always go hand in hand. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally. Wright was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "Because I've been watching how you manage those inventories. I've seen the way you handle logistics and supplies. I've noticed that every unit you support functions flawlessly in the field." He paused. "That's not the work of someone who doesn't understand tactical operations." Before Maya could respond, the mess hall door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Captain Reynolds stormed in, his face red with exertion and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Where's Major Wilson?" he demanded, scanning the nearly empty room. "Command Center," Jameson replied, instantly alert. "What's the situation?" "We just lost contact with Patrol Echo 6, Reynolds said, his usual swagger, replaced by genuine concern. They were conducting a routine sweep of the southern approaches when their radio went dead. No distress call, no indication of trouble, just silence. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night air. Patrol Echo 6 was a 6-person reconnaissance team led by Lieutenant Sarah Jackson, one of the few officers who'd never participated in the daily mockery. They'd been monitoring insurgent movement patterns for weeks, gathering intelligence on the increasing activity in the contested valley. "How long?" Jameson asked. 53 minutes, Reynolds checked his watch. "We've tried every frequency, sent drones over their last known position, nothing." The implications hung in the air like smoke. 53 minutes was an eternity in combat operations. If Echo 6 had been compromised, it meant insurgent forces were closer than intelligence had suggested. It meant the contested valley might not be so contested anymore. As the two senior NCOs hurried toward the command center, Wright turned back to Maya. "I have a feeling things are about to get very interesting around here," he said quietly. "When they do, remember what I said about special students and their abilities." Alone in the mess hall, Maya stared at her cooling stew and tried to process what had just happened. Wright knew more about her background than he was letting on. Jameson was clearly someone who valued competence over politics. And somewhere in the valley below, 6 good soldiers were missing, and possibly dead. She thought about Outpost Delta, with its strategic importance and critical supply needs. Tomorrow she'd be there, overseeing logistics for the same area where Patrol Echo 6 had vanished. For the first time since arriving at the outpost, her assignment felt less like exile and more like opportunity. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the promise of storms and the whisper of distant gunfire. Change was coming to Forward Operating Base Epsilon, whether anyone was ready for it or not. And for the first time in 14 months, Maya Foster felt like she might actually be part of it. The alarm that shattered the pre-dawn silence at 0347 hours wasn't the regular wake-up call. This was the combat alert, a harsh, stuttering wail that sent ice through every soldier's veins and brought the entire outpost to immediate readiness. Maya was out of her bunk and into her gear before the second cycle finished, muscle memory overriding the confusion of sudden awakening. As always, she strapped on the extra plate she'd been ordered to carry, the 20 pounds of conditioning that had become her personal cross to bear. She didn't know it yet. But that burden was about to become something entirely different. The command center was chaos when she arrived. Officers hunched over radio equipment, their faces grim in the green glow of tactical displays. Maps covered every available surface, marked with red X's that seemed to multiply even as she watched. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and barely controlled panic. "Foster," Major Wilson spotted her immediately, "you're up early for your shift." "The alarm, sir." "Thought you might need." "Patrol Echo 6 is confirmed KIA," the words hit like physical blows. Wilson's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of command decisions that had gone horribly wrong. Insurgent forces overran their position at approximately 0200. "We found their remains an hour ago. 6 people dead. 6 good soldiers who'd been doing their jobs, following orders, trusting that the intelligence reports were accurate. Lieutenant Jackson, who'd always nodded politely when passing her in the corridors. Specialist Rivera, barely 21, who'd shown her pictures of his newborn son. Sergeants Patel and Thompson, the inseparable duo who'd served together since basic training. All dead because someone had miscalculated enemy strength and positioning. "That's not the worst part," Wilson continued, turning back to the tactical display. "The attack was a probe. Intelligence indicates a major offensive is being planned, with Outpost Delta as the primary target. We're looking at a coordinated assault within the next 48 hours. First Sergeant Jameson approached with a clipboard thick with personnel assignments. "Sir, we've got a problem with tactical coordination. With Echo 6 gone, we're down 6 qualified operators. Cooper and Rodriguez are both on medical restriction from that training accident last week. We're running short on bodies for the forward operations. What about Outpost Delta? Wilson asked. That's our primary defensive position. Foster's assigned there, Jamison replied, glancing at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. But sir, with respect, logistics coordination during a potential enemy offensive requires someone who can do more than just manage supplies. The implication was clear. When the shooting started, she'd be useless. Just another liability in a position that might require split-second decisions between life and death. I understand the concern, Wilson said slowly, studying the map with the intense focus of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. But we don't have qualified alternatives. Foster, you'll be at Delta as planned, but with enhanced communications equipment. If you spot anything, and I mean anything, you report it immediately. Yes, sir. The words came out steadier than she felt. As the briefing continued, Maya found herself studying the terrain maps with new eyes. Delta wasn't just a supply outpost. It was the crown jewel of their defensive network. Positioned 700 feet above the valley floor, it offered unobstructed sightlines across nearly 3 kilometers of approach routes. Anyone attacking the FOB would have to cross that killing field, and whoever was coordinating from Delta would see them coming long before they posed a threat. The responsibility should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. The trek to Outpost Delta took 52 minutes of climbing treacherous mountain paths that would challenge an experienced rock climber. The outpost itself was a masterpiece of military engineering disguised as a pile of rocks, reinforced concrete walls buried under carefully arranged boulders, observation slits that were invisible from below, and enough supplies to sustain 12 soldiers for a week. The equipment inside made her breath catch. Advanced surveillance systems that could detect movement from over a mile away, laser rangefinders accurate to the centimeter, communications gear that could reach satellite networks or coordinate close air support. And in the corner, secured in a locked case that she definitely wasn't authorized to open, she caught a glimpse of what looked suspiciously like a tactical command console. Impressive setup, isn't it? The voice behind her nearly sent her diving for cover. Specialist Wright stood in the entrance, carrying a field pack and wearing the kind of expression that suggested he had more to say. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her heart still pounding from the surprise. "Someone needs to show you how to operate the advanced systems," he replied, settling his pack near the communications console. "Major Wilson asked me to make sure you're fully briefed on the equipment capabilities." It was a reasonable explanation, but something in his manner suggested there was more to it. Wright moved around the outpost with the familiarity of someone who'd spent considerable time there, adjusting settings and checking connections with practiced efficiency. This surveillance array can distinguish between human and animal heat signatures at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, he explained, powering up systems that hummed with expensive precision. The laser designator is NATO-compatible for artillery or airstrikes, and this, he gestured toward the locked case, well, that's above both our pay grades. They spent the next 2 hours going through every system, every protocol, every piece of equipment that might mean the difference between early warning and catastrophic surprise. Wright was a patient teacher, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that he was evaluating her as much as instructing her. "Question," she said as they finished the communications check. "How do you know so much about tactical command equipment?" Wright was quiet for a long moment, staring out through the observation slit at the valley below. "I spent 3 years as a tactical operations assistant before they moved me to medical," he finally admitted. "Worked with some of the best commanders in the military, including one who used to tell stories about a student named Foster who could coordinate operations that defied conventional thinking." The pieces clicked into place like a rifle bolt sliding home. "Colonel Harrington," he said. "She said you were the most naturally gifted tactical leader she'd ever trained. Also said the military bureaucracy would probably waste your talent because they were too stupid to recognize it." He turned to face her directly. She was right about the bureaucracy part. Question is, was she right about the talent? Before she could answer, the radio crackled to life with Major Wilson's voice. "All observation posts, this is command. We have confirmed enemy movement in sectors 5 through 9, estimated company strength force, approximately 120 hostiles moving toward Outpost Delta. All posts report contact immediately." Maya moved to the surveillance display, her hands suddenly steady despite the implications of what she was hearing. The screen showed the valley in ghostly green detail, every rock formation and gully clearly defined. And there, moving with the disciplined precision of professional fighters, were the heat signatures that meant death was coming to Outpost Delta. "Command, this is Delta," she said into the radio, surprised by the calm authority in her own voice. "I have visual on multiple enemy positions. Count approximately 140 hostiles in 3 separate groups. They're using the northeastern approach, staying below the ridgeline to avoid detection from the main outpost." "Copy that, Delta. Maintain observation and report any changes." Wright moved beside her, studying the surveillance display with the trained eye of someone who'd done this before. "They're good," he admitted. "Professional spacing, disciplined movement, coordinated timing. This isn't some ragtag militia, these are trained fighters." "And they're heading straight for the outpost," Maya added, tracking the movement patterns with growing concern. "Current speed and direction will put them in assault range within 5 hours, unless someone stops them first," Wright said quietly. The implication hung in the air between them, like cordite smoke. The outpost's defensive positions were designed to repel frontal assaults, not coordinated attacks by professional fighters who knew how to use terrain and tactics. The math was simple and brutal. 140 attackers against 82 defenders meant everyone was probably going to die, unless someone with very special skills could change the odds before the battle even began. Wright moved to the locked case and produced a key that definitely wasn't part of standard issue equipment. "Harrington left specific instructions," he said, opening the case to reveal a pristine tactical command console with advanced displays. "She said if you ever needed this, the key would find its way to you." Maya stared at the equipment that represented everything she'd lost and everything she might still become. In her hands, that system could coordinate defenses with surgical precision. In the right circumstances, one tactical solution could save dozens of lives. "This is highly irregular," she whispered. "So is having 140 enemy fighters about to overrun our position," Wright replied. "Command doesn't know about the console. They don't need to know unless you use it. And if you use it," he met her eyes directly, "you better not be wrong." Outside, the wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying with it the sound of distant engines and the promise of violence. In 5 hours, the battle for Forward Operating Base Epsilon would begin. The only question was whether it would be a massacre or a miracle. Maya Foster picked up the tactical headset, feeling its familiar weight settle against her ears like a lost piece of her soul returning home. For the first time in 14 months, she felt like herself again. The wait was almost over. The call came at 1,417 hours, crackling through the radio with the kind of urgency that made experienced soldiers reach for their weapons before their minds fully processed the words. All stations, this is Highway Command. Be advised, Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy has departed Forward Operating Base Bravo. ETA to your location, 1,630 hours. This is a priority movement. Repeat, priority movement. In Outpost Delta, Maya lowered her binoculars and exchanged glances with Wright, who had remained at the post despite officially completing his training mission 6 hours earlier. The timing couldn't have been worse. Lieutenant Colonel Parker, the commanding officer of the entire regional command, was driving straight into what intelligence now confirmed was a coordinated insurgent offensive. "Command, this is Delta," Wright keyed the radio. "Advise Highway Command that hostile forces are currently positioned along the primary route. Recommend alternate routing or postponement." The response came back in Major Wilson's tense voice. "Delta, negative on postponement. Lieutenant Colonel Parker is conducting emergency tactical assessment due to recent losses. Convoy will proceed as scheduled with enhanced security." Quote, "Enhanced security," as if adding another Humvee would make a difference against 140 professional fighters who'd been planning this ambush for weeks. Maya returned to the surveillance display, tracking the enemy positions that had barely moved in the past 4 hours. They were waiting for something. Probably the exact opportunity that Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy was about to provide. "They know," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "The enemy. They know about the convoy." She pointed to the heat signatures clustered around the prime ambush positions along a mountain road. "Look at their deployment. They're not positioned to attack the outpost." They're positioned to hit a moving target on the highway. Wright studied the display, his expression growing darker as the tactical picture became clear. "Inside information," he said grimly. Someone told them exactly when and where to wait. The implications were staggering. A security breach at this level meant the enemy had intelligence assets embedded within the command structure. Lieutenant Colonel Parker wasn't just driving into an ambush. He was driving into a trap that had been specifically designed for him. "We have to warn them," Maya said, reaching for the radio. "With what proof?" Wright replied. "We can report enemy positions, but we can't prove they're targeting the convoy specifically. Command will assume we're being overcautious." He was right, and they both knew it. Military hierarchy didn't reward soldiers who second-guessed senior officers, especially when those soldiers were a logistics specialist and a medic with credibility issues. The radio crackled again. "Delta, this is Command. We need continuous updates on enemy positions relative to Highway 3. Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy will be using standard route with minimal deviation." "Roger, Command." Wright's voice was steady, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the microphone. "Be advised, enemy forces are concentrated in Sector 7 Alpha through 7 Charlie with clear sight lines to the highway." "Acknowledged. Convoy has been briefed on potential threats." Briefed on potential threats, as if awareness alone could stop an RPG from 500 meters away or a roadside IED. Maya moved to the observation slit that offered the clearest view of Highway 3 as it wound through the valley below. The road was a tactical nightmare, a narrow ribbon of asphalt that hugged the mountainside with no cover and limited options for evasive maneuvers. Anyone traveling that route was completely exposed to fire from the elevated positions where enemy forces were now dug in. "There," she said, pointing to a specific ridge formation about 600 meters from the highway. "That's where I'd put my primary attack team. Perfect elevation, clear sight lines, multiple escape routes." Wright joined her at the observation slit, following her pointing finger to the rocky outcropping that dominated the valley approach. "You think there's someone up there?" "I know there is." She adjusted the high-powered scope, bringing the distant ridge into sharp focus. "Third boulder from the left, about 15 feet below the crest. You can just make out the barrel of an RPG launcher if you know what to look for." Wright squinted through his own binoculars, scanning the area she'd indicated. After several seconds, he lowered the glasses with a frustrated shake of his head. "I don't see anything." "Because you're looking for the weapon," Maya explained patiently. "Look for the shadow that's slightly wrong, the rock formation that's just a little too regular. The human eye wants to see patterns, so a good ambush team uses that against you." She guided him through the process, teaching him the same techniques Colonel Harrington had drilled into her during 3 years of intensive training. How to read terrain like a book, how to spot the subtle signs that marked a professional's position, how to think like a predator who lived by remaining invisible until the moment of the kill. "There," Wright said suddenly. "Something just moved behind that boulder." "RPG launcher," Maya confirmed. "He's adjusting his position for the convoy's approach, probably zeroing his sights for the exact range to the highway." The tactical picture was now crystal clear. Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy would round the bend at 1,630 hours, moving at standard convoy speed along a predictable route. The enemy fighters positioned at optimal range with perfect concealment would have approximately 45 seconds to take their shots before the convoy passed beyond the engagement zone. It was a textbook ambush setup, and there was nothing either of them could do to stop it. "Command, this is Delta," Wright tried again. "We have positive identification of ambush positions overlooking Highway 3. Strongly recommend convoy delay until threat can be neutralized." "Delta, convoy is already en route. ETA 18 minutes. We need you to maintain observation and provide real-time updates on enemy positions." 18 minutes. In 18 minutes, Lieutenant Colonel Parker would die unless someone did something extraordinary. Maya looked at the tactical command console still secured in its case, then at the surveillance display showing the enemy ambush positions. The math was simple. She had the equipment, she had the skills, and she had a clear tactical advantage. What she didn't have was authorization, backup, or any guarantee that she wouldn't face court-martial for circumventing the chain of command. "The terrain's wrong," Wright said quietly, reading her thoughts. "Multiple firing positions, layered defense, pre-sighted fields of fire. This isn't something you can coordinate a response to without proper authorization. I know. She was already running the tactical calculations in her head, estimating response times, analyzing firing solutions, and mapping extraction routes with the kind of precision that Colonel Harrington had drilled into her for 3 years. Even if you could coordinate a response, Wright pointed out, our closest QRF is 12 minutes out. They'll never make it in time. Then I won't use them. The confidence in her own voice surprised her. 14 months of self-doubt and institutional dismissal had nearly convinced her that she really was just a failed ranger candidate with poor decision-making skills. But holding the possibility of action, feeling the familiar weight of tactical equipment, brought back everything Colonel Harrington had taught her about the difference between soldiers who could follow orders and leaders who could save lives when it mattered most. Wright was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display and the distant ridge where death waited with professional patience. If you take this action, he said finally, there's no going back. Command will want explanations. There'll be investigations, review boards, questions about authorization and chain of command. And if I don't take action, Lieutenant Colonel Parker dies in 16 minutes. Probably. Definitely. She was already powering up the tactical console, her hands moving with the muscle memory of someone who'd performed these actions thousands of times in training. The question isn't whether I'll face consequences. The question is whether I can live with doing nothing when I have the skills to make a difference. The tactical headset felt like coming home. The display aligned with her vision, as if it had been custom-fitted. Colonel Harrington had always said that truly gifted tactical operators didn't use their equipment. They became part of it, an extension of their will made manifest in strategic precision. Through the surveillance system, the enemy ambush positions jumped into crystal clarity. She could see the carefully arranged fighters, the precisely calculated angles, the professional setup that spoke of years of training and dozens of successful operations. This wasn't some amateur group with rusty weapons. This was an expert fighting force that had probably never failed a mission that mattered. Today would be their first. 14 minutes, Wright announced, tracking the convoy's progress on GPS. They're making good time. Maya began her mental preparation, the cognitive patterns that Colonel Harrington had taught her to maximize situational awareness and decision-making speed. In her mind, she could hear Harrington's voice. Tactical leadership is 10% knowledge and 90% execution. Control your information flow, control your decision points, control your response options. Everything else is just logistics. 13 minutes, 12, 11. The enemy fighters moved again, adjusting their positions for the final attack. Through her tactical display, Maya could see them settling into the perfect ambush stance, their weapons trained on the exact point where Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy would appear around the mountain curve. 10 minutes, 9, 8. Maya made her final calculations, accounting for every variable that could affect the tactical response over 2 kilometers of mountainous terrain, line of sight, cover positions, response times, even the potential for civilian casualties in the area. Colonel Harrington had taught her that perfect tactical operations weren't conducted under perfect conditions. They were achieved by perfect compensation for imperfect conditions. Command, this is Delta, Wright tried one last time. We have positive target acquisition on hostile ambush positions. Request permission to coordinate defensive response. Negative, Delta. You are not authorized for tactical operations. Continue observation only. Wright looked at Maya, who was now fully immersed in the tactical display, her breathing steady in the slow, rhythmic pattern of someone in complete control. Her hands, the same hands that had supposedly faltered during her ranger school failure, were rock steady on the console. No one's going to authorize this, he said quietly. I know. If you're wrong, Lieutenant Colonel Parker dies. I won't be wrong. If you're not wrong, your career is probably over. She turned to look at him directly, her eyes clear and determined. Marcus, 14 months ago, I let bureaucratic cowards convince me that I wasn't good enough to do the job I was born for. I let their sabotage become my shame. I let their limitations become my limitations. She turned back to the display. Not today. 7 minutes, Wright announced. Convoy is in the final approach. Through her tactical display, Maya watched the enemy fighters make their final preparations. They were good. She could see it in every movement, every adjustment, every professional habit that marked years of successful operations. Under different circumstances, she might have respected their skill. Today, that skill was going to get them killed. 5 minutes, Wright said. Convoy is visible from ambush position. The radio crackled with convoy traffic. Highway 3, this is Parker Actual, approaching Checkpoint Charlie. No signs of hostile activity. Because they couldn't see what she could see. They couldn't see the professional killers waiting with infinite patience for the perfect moment. They couldn't see the RPGs already trained on the exact spot where the lead vehicle would pass. 3 minutes, Wright whispered. Maya's world narrowed to the tactical display, her mind completely focused on the multi-dimensional chess game she was about to play. Every resource, every possibility, every potential outcome, calculated and recalculated in real time. Through the display, she saw the enemy fighters shift slightly, preparing for their attack. In 90 seconds, Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy would round the curve and enter their kill zone. In 95 seconds, the ambush would begin and change the course of the war, unless she changed it first. Now or never, Wright said. Maya Foster, the failed Ranger candidate who managed inventories for real soldiers, took a breath, held it, and made her choice. The decision that changed everything was executed with a precision that would have made Colonel Harrington proud. Maya's fingers flew across the tactical console, her mind 10 steps ahead of every action. First, she activated the outpost's concealed defensive measures, systems that most people didn't even know existed. 3 remote-controlled flashbang launchers disguised as rocks and positioned at strategic points around the valley were now under her control. Next, she hacked into the convoy's communications system, a breach of protocol that would earn her a court-martial if she survived long enough to face one. Parker Actual, this is Tactical Override Sierra 9. She used the emergency code that Colonel Harrington had taught her, a designation so classified that only senior commanders would recognize it. You are driving into an ambush. On my mark, all vehicles execute immediate Protocol Zulu. Authentication code Delta 79er Alpha 3. There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio before Lieutenant Colonel Parker himself responded. Authentication confirmed. Awaiting your mark, Sierra 9. Protocol Zulu, the emergency evasive maneuver designed for exactly this scenario. All vehicles would simultaneously deploy smoke, change direction, and accelerate to maximum speed in a choreographed pattern designed to confuse enemy targeting. Through her display, Maya saw the enemy fighters tensing, their weapons tracking the approaching convoy with lethal precision. The lead RPG team was now in final firing position, their weapon aimed directly at the point where the lead Humvee would appear in approximately 20 seconds. Right, she said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through her system. Take these coordinates and prepare to assist casualties. She rattled off a series of numbers that pinpointed a small depression 300 meters south of the highway, the only terrain feature that would provide adequate cover for the convoy once Protocol Zulu was initiated. But that's in the direct line of fire from the secondary ambush position, Wright protested. Not for long, Maya replied, her fingers still dancing across the tactical console. In exactly 17 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. What kind of distraction? The kind that changes the odds. Through her display, Maya watched the convoy round the final curve, right on schedule. The enemy fighters adjusted their aim, fingers tightening on triggers, the entire ambush team moving with the synchronized precision of professionals about to execute a well-rehearsed plan. Mark! Maya's voice cut through the radio chatter. 3 things happened simultaneously. First, all 4 vehicles in Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy executed perfect Protocol Zulu maneuvers, deploying smoke, changing direction, and accelerating in a staggered pattern that made targeting nearly impossible. Second, the 3 concealed flashbang launchers activated, sending disorienting explosions of light and sound into the primary ambush positions. Third, and most unexpectedly, Maya triggered the outpost's perimeter warning system, a series of red flares that erupted from seemingly random locations throughout the valley, creating the illusion of a much larger coordinated counterattack than was actually occurring. The enemy fighters, momentarily disoriented by the flashbangs and confused by the flares, hesitated just long enough for the convoy to reach the depression Wright had identified as their best cover position. But Maya wasn't finished. Through her tactical display, she tracked a secondary enemy position that was still perfectly placed to target the convoy's new location. "Command, this is Delta," she said into the radio, switching back to official channels. "Be advised, enemy forces are moving to secondary attack positions. Request immediate artillery support at the following coordinates." She transmitted the exact location of the secondary ambush team, not where they were now, but where her tactical calculations predicted they would be in exactly 45 seconds based on their current movement patterns. "Delta, this is Command. Artillery support is not authorized without visual confirmation of target location." Maya didn't hesitate. "Command, this is Acting Tactical Officer Foster. Authentication code, November Echo 725. I have positive identification of enemy combatants at transmitted coordinates and am assuming tactical responsibility for this operation." The authentication code, another of Colonel Harrington's secrets, would register in the command system as a priority override used only by certified tactical operations officers in extreme emergencies. There was a brief pause before a new voice came on the radio. The battalion's fire support officer awakened to the reality that someone with proper authentication was calling for immediate fire. "Delta, this is fire control. Authentication confirmed. Artillery strike incoming on your coordinates. Impact in 30 seconds." Outside, the distant thunder of 155mm howitzers echoed through the mountains as the FOB's artillery battery responded to the fire mission. Maya watched through her tactical display as the enemy fighters moved exactly where she'd predicted, taking up positions that would have given them perfect firing solutions on the convoy's new location, if they'd been allowed to get there. The artillery shells landed with devastating precision, exactly as she'd calculated. The entire secondary ambush position disappeared in a cloud of dust and explosive force. "Parker, actual, this is Delta. Be advised, your route to extraction point Charlie is now clear. Proceed immediately. You have a 90-second window before tertiary enemy elements can respond." Through her display, Maya watched as the convoy pulled out of the depression and accelerated along the route she'd designated, a path that would take them safely beyond the effective range of the remaining enemy fighters. "Delta, this is Parker actual." Lieutenant Colonel Parker's voice carried a mixture of confusion and grudging respect. "Who the hell is running tactical up there?" "Sir, this is Sergeant Foster. I coordinated the response using available resources." "Foster, the logistics specialist?" "Yes, sir." There was a moment of silence before Parker responded, "Outstanding work, Sergeant. I want a full debrief when we reach the FOB." As the convoy disappeared around the mountain curve, now safely beyond the ambush zone, Maya turned her attention to the remaining enemy fighters. Most were in full retreat, their carefully planned operation now in shambles. A few were still attempting to regroup, but without their command structure, they posed little immediate threat. "Delta, this is Command." Major Wilson's voice carried the strained tone of someone trying to make sense of a rapidly evolving situation. "What just happened?" "Command, this is Delta. Hostile ambush neutralized. Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy is proceeding safely to extraction point Charlie. Request immediate QRF deployment to secure Highway 3 and prevent enemy regrouping." Maya could almost hear the confusion and hurried consultations happening in the command center. She had just executed a perfect tactical operation without authorization, using classified protocols that shouldn't have been available to her, and somehow managed to save a senior officer's life in the process. "Delta, stand by for further instructions. Do not, repeat, do not take any additional tactical actions without direct authorization." Wright was staring at her with an expression that mixed awe with concern. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he asked quietly. "Saved 30 lives and prevented a strategic disaster," she replied, shutting down the tactical console with methodical precision. "You also just used classified tactical codes, commandeered artillery support, and implemented protocols that only senior officers are supposed to know about. There's going to be hell to pay." Maya nodded, the adrenaline of combat decision-making beginning to fade, leaving room for the cold reality of military consequences to settle in. "I know, but they're alive." "They're alive," Wright agreed. "Question is, what happens to you now?" She had no answer for that. In the valley below, Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy was now safely beyond enemy reach. The surviving insurgent fighters were in full retreat, and the immediate crisis had passed. Whatever happened next, court-martial, discharge, or worse, at least she'd done what she was trained to do. For the first time in 14 months, Maya Foster had been herself again, not the failed ranger candidate, not the logistics specialist carrying extra plates as punishment, but the tactical leader Colonel Harrington had always believed she could be. The radio crackled again. "Delta, this is Lieutenant Colonel Parker. I've just received a preliminary report on what happened up there. Is it true you executed a tactical override using Sierra 9 protocols?" "Yes, sir." "Those protocols are only taught to graduates of Harrington's Advanced Tactical Operations course." "Yes, sir." There was a long pause before Parker spoke again. "I trained under Harrington myself 10 years ago. She only accepts students with exceptional potential." Another pause. "Delta, secure your position and prepare for my arrival. We need to talk." Wright's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That doesn't sound like someone preparing to court-martial you." "No," Maya agreed. "It doesn't." Outside, the wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the occasional distant explosion as the remaining artillery shells found their targets. In the valley below, the dust was settling on what should have been a devastating ambush, but had instead become a testament to what happened when the right person was in the right place at the right time, even if they weren't supposed to be there at all. Maya touched the extra plate she'd been forced to carry as punishment. 20 pounds of conditioning that had been meant to break her spirit, but had instead become a constant reminder of her own strength. She didn't know it yet, but in less than an hour, those same plates would serve a purpose no one could have anticipated. For now, she watched through the observation slit as Lieutenant Colonel Parker's convoy negotiated the final stretch of highway toward the FOB. She'd done what she was trained to do. Whatever came next, she would face it standing tall. The waiting had begun. Lieutenant Colonel Parker arrived at Outpost Delta precisely 47 minutes after the ambush was neutralized. He didn't come alone. His security detail, 6 soldiers with the hardened expressions of men who'd just escaped death, formed a protective perimeter, while Parker himself strode into the outpost with the confident gait of someone accustomed to walking through firefights without flinching. At 46, Parker was neither the youngest nor the oldest officer of his rank, but his reputation preceded him. A West Point graduate with 3 combat tours and a Silver Star, he was known for 2 things: tactical brilliance and zero tolerance for incompetence. The fact that he was here personally rather than summoning Maya to headquarters suggested this was a matter he considered too important for standard protocols. "Sergeant Foster." Parker's voice was calmer than she'd expected given the circumstances. His weathered face betrayed nothing as he studied her, extra plates and all, with the calculating gaze of someone who'd learned to assess soldiers in an instant. "I understand you took certain liberties with the chain of command today." "Yes, sir." "You implemented a Sierra 9 tactical override, which required an authentication code that only specialized tactical operations officers should possess." "Yes, sir." "You coordinated artillery fire on positions that could not be visually confirmed from your location, based entirely on predictive calculations." "Yes, sir." Parker turned to examine the tactical console, which Maya had shut down but not hidden. His fingers traced the advanced controls with the familiarity of someone who'd used similar equipment. "This system isn't standard issue for a logistics outpost," he said, his tone making it a question rather than a statement. "No, sir." Quote, "And I'm guessing your actual role in this deployment isn't primarily logistics, despite what your official documentation might say." Maya hesitated. This was the moment where her future would be decided. She could maintain the fiction, claim the tactical response was a lucky guess, that the authentication codes were something she'd overheard, that the console was just something she'd found. Or she could tell the truth and accept whatever consequences followed. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "I was trained by Colonel Elizabeth Harrington in advanced tactical operations for 3 years. I was her final student before she retired. My failure at Ranger School was the result of deliberate sabotage by Major Daniels, who ensured my equipment malfunctioned during the final assessment. The official record states that I froze under pressure and couldn't make tactical decisions when it mattered. The truth is, I was never given a fair chance to demonstrate my abilities." Parker's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Harrington only accepted students with exceptional potential," he said quietly. "She turned down General Sons for not meeting her standards." "Yes, sir." "And you're telling me she trained you personally for 3 years?" "Yes, sir." Parker was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Maya, the tactical console, and the valley below, where his convoy had nearly been annihilated. "The authentication code you used," he said finally, "November Echo 725. That's not just any tactical override. That's Harrington's personal authorization sequence. She only shares that with students she considers." He paused, searching for the right word. "Exceptional." Maya said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Today," Parker continued, "you identified an ambush that our intelligence assets missed, predicted enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, and coordinated a tactical response that saved 30 lives, including my own. Using skills and knowledge that, according to your official record, you don't possess." "Yes, sir." "Why the extra plates?" he asked, suddenly, gesturing to the additional weight she carried. "Those aren't standard issue." "Disciplinary measure, sir. Captain Reynolds ordered me to carry them as, quote, conditioning after I questioned his patrol routing last month." Parker's eyebrows rose slightly. "And did subsequent events prove your concerns valid?" Quote, "Patrol Bravo 4 lost 2 men in an ambush at the exact location I'd identified as high risk, sir." Something hardened in Parker's expression. Not anger directed at her, but the cold determination of a commander who just discovered a serious problem within his command structure. "Specialist Wright," Parker turned to address the medic, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "I understand you provided Sergeant Foster with the key to access this tactical equipment. Care to explain?" Wright straightened to attention. "Sir, Colonel Harrington left specific instructions before her retirement. She said if Foster ever needed access to proper tactical equipment, someone would ensure she got it. I was contacted 3 months ago by Harrington's former adjutant and given the key with instructions to watch for the right moment." "So this was all prearranged? A shadow chain of command operating within my battalion without my knowledge or approval?" "No, sir," Wright replied. "Just a contingency plan created by someone who believed the system might fail a soldier with exceptional abilities." Parker nodded slowly, processing this information with the methodical thoroughness of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions based on incomplete data. "Sergeant Foster, I have a decision to make. According to regulations, you've committed multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Unauthorized use of classified systems, circumvention of the chain of command, implementation of tactical operations without proper authorization. Any one of these could end your career." Maya braced herself for what was coming next. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, possibly even criminal charges. She'd known the risks when she made her decision. "However," Parker continued, "I find myself in the uncomfortable position of being alive because you chose to ignore those regulations. 30 of my soldiers are returning to their families because you had the courage to do what was necessary rather than what was authorized." He turned to look out through the observation slit at the valley below, where smoke still rose from the positions where artillery shells had landed with devastating precision. "Colonel Harrington and I served together in Afghanistan," he said, his voice taking on a reflective quality. "She once told me that the military's greatest weakness wasn't our enemies or our equipment. It was our inability to recognize talent that didn't fit neatly into our preconceived categories." He turned back to face Maya directly. "I believe she may have been right." The radio on the console crackled to life before Maya could respond. All stations, this is command. Be advised we have incoming artillery fire at the main fob. Multiple impacts on the eastern perimeter. All personnel take cover immediately." Parker moved to the surveillance display with practiced efficiency, scanning the valley with the trained eye of a tactical officer. "There," he pointed to a distant ridgeline where faint heat signatures were visible. "Enemy artillery position, approximately 3.5 kilometers east of the fob. They must have held it in reserve for a secondary attack." Maya joined him at the display, her mind already calculating firing solutions and response options. "Sir, they have the range dialed in. The eastern perimeter houses the command center and medical facilities, if those shells hit." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Parker was already reaching for the radio. "Command, this is Parker. Requesting immediate counter-battery fire on coordinates." He paused, looking to Maya. Without hesitation, she rattled off a precise set of coordinates, not where the enemy artillery was currently positioned, but where her calculations indicated they would relocate after firing their next volley. Parker relayed the coordinates, then turned to her with a questioning look. You're targeting empty ground. No, sir. I'm targeting where they'll be in approximately 30 seconds. Standard artillery doctrine is to fire 3 ranging shots, then relocate to avoid counter-battery fire. They've fired 2. After the 3rd, they'll move to those coordinates to continue their attack from a position they believe is safe. Parker's expression shifted from skepticism to dawning respect, as he realized the sophistication of her tactical thinking. Command, be advised these are predictive coordinates based on enemy movement patterns, he added into the radio. Fire for effect immediately upon confirmation of 3rd enemy volley. They didn't have to wait long. 20 seconds later, a 3rd set of explosions blossomed along the FOB's eastern perimeter, visible even from their distant observation post. Almost immediately afterward, the surveillance display showed the enemy artillery team breaking down their position and moving exactly as Maya had predicted. Counter-battery fire incoming, the radio announced. Impact in 5, 4, 3, 2. The distant ridge erupted in a series of precisely targeted explosions. Through the surveillance display, Maya and Parker watched as the enemy artillery position disappeared in a cloud of dust and fire. Direct hit, Parker confirmed, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a commander seeing justice delivered. Enemy artillery neutralized. He turned to Maya with newfound respect. That wasn't luck or guesswork. That was textbook Harrington. Predictive tactical response based on pattern recognition and psychological profiling. She always said that knowing what your enemy will do before they do it is the difference between reacting to chaos and controlling it, Maya replied. I remember, Parker nodded. Foster, I need to get back to the FOB immediately. The situation there is still developing, and I need to assess the damage from this artillery strike. But this conversation isn't over. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. We have decisions to make about your future. Yes, sir. As Parker prepared to depart, Wright approached with the latest surveillance update. Sir, we're detecting additional movement in the valley. Looks like the enemy is consolidating their remaining forces for another push, possibly toward the damaged eastern perimeter. Parker studied the display, his expression grim. They're adapting their strategy based on our responses. Smart. Command needs to know about this immediately. He turned to Maya. Foster, maintain your position here and continue monitoring enemy movements. If you detect any significant changes, contact Command directly using standard protocols. No more tactical overrides unless absolutely necessary. Understood, sir. As Parker and his security detail prepared to depart, he paused at the entrance to the outpost. Those extra plates, he said, gesturing to the additional weight Maya carried. Consider that requirement rescinded, effective immediately. Thank you, sir, but with respect, I'll keep them for now. They've become useful. Parker studied her for a moment, then nodded once in understanding before disappearing down the mountain path. Left alone with Wright in the observation post, Maya returned to the surveillance display, tracking the enemy's regrouping efforts with the focused attention of someone who understood that the battle was far from over. So, Wright said quietly, that went better than expected. We're not out of the woods yet, Maya replied, her eyes never leaving the display. Parker may appreciate what happened today, but there's still Captain Reynolds, Major Wilson, and the entire chain of command to deal with. One officer's gratitude doesn't erase 14 months of institutional bias. True, Wright conceded, but it's a start. The radio crackled again with updates from the FOB. The artillery strike had caused significant damage to the eastern perimeter defenses. 3 soldiers were confirmed wounded, with 1 in critical condition. The command center remained operational, but communications were spotty due to damaged equipment. They're vulnerable, Maya said, studying the tactical situation with growing concern. If the enemy launches a coordinated assault now while the defenses are compromised, but you neutralized most of their fighting force, Wright pointed out. We got their forward elements and the artillery team, Maya corrected. But look here. She pointed to heat signatures gathering in a ravine approximately 2 kilometers from the FOB. That's their reserve force, at least 60 fighters, maybe more. They're staying out of artillery range, but positioning for a ground assault. Wright studied the display, his expression darkening as he recognized the tactical implications. The FOB isn't prepared for another attack. Not with the eastern perimeter compromised and resources already stretched thin from the earlier engagements. Maya was quiet for a long moment, her mind working through the problem from multiple angles. Colonel Harrington had taught her that tactical leadership wasn't just about responding to the enemy's actions. It was about shaping the battlefield to your advantage before the fighting even began. "I need to get to the fob," she said finally. "What? Why? Parker ordered you to stay here." "Because the real fight is about to happen there, not here, and they need someone who can see the bigger picture." She turned to him, her decision already made. "You're staying here to maintain surveillance and communications. I'm taking the emergency route down to the fob." "That path is barely more than a goat trail," Wright protested. "And it's directly exposed to the valley. If any enemy spotters see you—" "They won't," Maya replied, with the confidence of someone who'd calculated the risks and accepted them. "The sun angle will be behind me for the next hour, and I know how to move without being detected. Parker will have your head if you abandon your post. Better my head than 30 more body bags, because no one at the fob understands what's coming." She was already gathering essential equipment, communications gear, medical supplies, and most importantly, her extra plates. "I don't understand why you're still carrying those," Wright said, gesturing to the plates. "Parker said you could ditch them." Maya secured the plates firmly to her tactical vest. "Because sometimes the greatest strengths come from the burdens we're forced to bear." She offered no further explanation as she checked her sidearm and prepared to depart. "Maya," Wright said, using her first name for the first time since they'd met, "be careful down there. The eastern perimeter is going to be chaos, and not everyone will welcome your arrival." "I know, but it's where I need to be." She paused at the entrance to the outpost. "Keep watching those heat signatures. If they start moving toward the FOB, notify command immediately. Use authentication code Whiskey 7 if you need to cut through the bureaucracy." "Harrington gave you multiple override codes?" She believed in being prepared. With that, Maya slipped out of the outpost and began the treacherous descent toward the fob. The emergency route was exactly as Wright had described, little more than a narrow trail that clung to the mountainside, often disappearing entirely where rock slides or erosion had worn away the path. It was designed for emergencies only, when speed mattered more than safety. Few soldiers even knew it existed, and fewer still had ever attempted to navigate it. Maya moved with the sure-footed confidence of someone who'd studied the terrain maps extensively, anticipating each difficult section before she reached it. The extra plates she carried made the descent more challenging, adding 20 pounds to every step and shift in balance. But 14 months of conditioning had transformed what was meant as punishment into a source of strength. Her body had adapted to the additional weight, building muscle and endurance that now served her well. Halfway down the mountain, the radio she carried came to life with Wright's urgent voice. "Foster, enemy forces are on the move. I count approximately 70 fighters advancing toward the FOB's eastern perimeter, ETA, to contact approximately 22 minutes." "Copy that," she replied, increasing her pace despite the dangerous terrain. "Have you notified command?" "Affirmative, but communications are still compromised. I'm not sure the message got through clearly." "Keep trying. I'm about 15 minutes from the FOB." She pushed herself harder, navigating the treacherous path with a combination of technical skill and sheer determination. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the valley and providing additional concealment for her descent. As she approached the final stretch before the FOB's perimeter, the sound of sporadic gunfire reached her ears, probing shots from enemy scouts testing the damaged defenses. She paused behind a large boulder, assessing the situation before proceeding. The eastern perimeter was in worse shape than the reports had suggested. The artillery strikes had destroyed a 20-meter section of the defensive wall, and the hasty repairs looked inadequate to repel a determined assault. Soldiers moved with the frantic energy of people trying to prepare for an attack they knew was coming but couldn't properly defend against. Maya keyed her radio one last time. "Right, I'm at the eastern perimeter. It's bad. Tell command the enemy will breach this section within 5 minutes of engagement unless reinforcements are redirected immediately." "Copy that. Be careful in there." Taking a deep breath, Maya emerged from cover and approached the perimeter checkpoint. The guard on duty, a young private who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, immediately raised his weapon. "Identify yourself." "Sergeant Maya Foster, Outpost Delta. I need to speak with whoever's in charge of perimeter defense immediately." The private hesitated, then gestured toward a sandbagged position 30 meters inside the perimeter. Captain Reynolds is coordinating the defense from the command post. Of course it would be Reynolds. The universe had a sense of humor after all. Maya moved quickly through the organized chaos of the defensive position, noting with professional dismay the tactical vulnerabilities that seemed to multiply with each step. Soldiers were positioned without proper fields of fire, ammunition was being distributed inefficiently, and no one seemed to have a clear understanding of the enemy's approach vectors. Captain Reynolds was hunched over a tactical map when she arrived at the command post, his face streaked with dust and sweat, his expression that of a man watching his career crumble in real time. "Foster?" His surprise quickly turned to anger. "What the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Outpost Delta." "Sir, enemy forces are advancing on your position from 3 vectors, not just the obvious eastern approach. Their main force of approximately 70 fighters will hit this perimeter in," she checked her watch, "approximately 12 minutes. Reynolds stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and reflexive hostility. "And how exactly do you know this? Did you suddenly develop psychic powers, along with your talent for insubordination? Outpost Delta has surveillance coverage of the entire valley. Specialist Wright is tracking their movement in real time." She pointed to specific locations on Reynolds' tactical map. "They'll hit here, here, and here simultaneously, with their main force concentrated on the breach point created by the artillery strike." For a moment, Reynolds looked like he might dismiss her assessment outright. Then the radio on his tactical vest crackled with Lieutenant Colonel Parker's voice. "All defensive positions. This is Parker. Be advised, Sergeant Foster's tactical assessment is confirmed by drone surveillance. Prepare for coordinated enemy assault from multiple vectors. Eastern perimeter is the critical vulnerability. Reinforce immediately." The transformation in Reynolds' expression would have been comical under different circumstances. Shock, confusion, and finally, the dawning realization that the logistics specialist he'd been punishing for months might actually know what she was talking about. "How did you?" he began. "Sir, we don't have time for explanations," Maya cut him off. "The eastern perimeter needs to be reinforced now, or we're going to lose the entire fob." The transformation in Captain Reynolds' demeanor was immediate. Professional survival instinct overrode personal animosity as he processed Lieutenant Colonel Parker's confirmation of Maya's assessment. "Sergeant Miller," Reynolds barked at a nearby NCO. "Redirect 2nd Squad to reinforce the eastern approach. Rodriguez, get those M240s repositioned to cover the breach point. Move!" Soldiers scrambled to comply, the earlier disorganization giving way to purposeful activity. Maya studied the tactical map, her mind calculating defensive angles and fields of fire with the precision Colonel Harrington had drilled into her. "Sir, the current defensive posture is still vulnerable," she said, pointing to specific weaknesses in the perimeter. "You've got overlapping fields of fire here and here, but this entire 30-meter section has minimal coverage. That's where they'll concentrate their assault." Reynolds looked like he wanted to dismiss her input out of habit, but the tactical logic was undeniable. He adjusted his communications headset. "3rd Squad, reposition to Sector 4. I need interlocking fields of fire covering the eastern approach." As the defensive preparations continued, Maya noticed something crucial missing from the tactical setup. "Where's the QRF?" she asked, referring to the quick reaction force that should have been staged for immediate counterattack. "Deployed to the northern perimeter," Reynolds replied grimly. "We had reports of enemy movement in that sector before the artillery hit." Maya processed this information quickly. "They're feinting. Draw your reserves away from the actual point of attack." Reynolds' expression darkened as he recognized the tactical implications. "If you're right, we don't have enough personnel to hold the eastern perimeter when their main force hits. We need to recall the QRF immediately." Too late. They're already engaged with enemy scouts to the north. Even if we could reach them, they wouldn't make it back in time. Maya surveyed the chaotic preparations around them. Soldiers moving ammunition crates, setting up defensive positions, preparing for the assault that would hit any minute. They were brave, well-trained, and completely unprepared for the concentrated attack that was coming. "I need to get to the breach point," she said suddenly. Reynolds stared at her in disbelief. "The breach point? That's going to be the focal point of their entire assault. It's suicide." "It's also where I can do the most good." She was already gathering additional ammunition and communications equipment. I need 2 volunteers with combat experience and steady nerves. Foster, I haven't authorized. With all due respect, sir, Lieutenant Colonel Parker confirmed my tactical assessment. The enemy will hit that breach point with everything they have in approximately 7 minutes. We can stand here arguing about chain of command, or we can do something to prevent this fob from being overrun. The radio crackled again with Parker's voice. Captain Reynolds, status report on Eastern Perimeter reinforcement. Reynolds hesitated only briefly before responding. Eastern Perimeter reinforcement in progress, sir. Sergeant Foster is coordinating a special defensive team at the breach point. Approved, came Parker's immediate reply. Foster, you have tactical authority for breach point defense. Do whatever it takes to hold that position. The official authorization hung in the air between them, transforming what would have been insubordination into a direct order. Reynolds' expression cycled through multiple emotions before settling into reluctant acceptance. Miller, Thompson, you're with Foster, he ordered. The rest of you, maintain defensive positions and be prepared to provide supporting fire on her command. Maya nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned to the 2 soldiers who'd been assigned to her impromptu team. Staff Sergeant James Miller was a combat veteran, with 3 tours under his belt, his weathered face showing the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen the worst and survived. Corporal Sarah Thompson was younger but had distinguished herself during previous engagements, earning a reputation for cool-headed precision under fire. We've got 5 minutes to prepare a nasty surprise, Maya told them as they moved quickly toward the breach point. The enemy thinks this is our weakest position. We're going to make it their biggest mistake. The breach in the perimeter wall was approximately 15 meters wide, a jagged gap where the artillery shells had torn through the reinforced concrete. Hasty repairs had created a makeshift barricade of sandbags and debris, but it wouldn't withstand a determined assault. Maya surveyed the area with the tactical eye Colonel Harrington had cultivated. Miller, I need claymore mines positioned here, here, and here. She indicated specific points along the likely approach vectors. Set them for remote detonation, not tripwires. We need to control exactly when they go off. On it, Sergeant. Thompson, take position behind that concrete fragment. It'll give you elevation and cover, while maintaining clear fields of fire toward the main approach. I want controlled bursts, not suppression fire. Make every round count. Yes, Sergeant. As her team prepared the defensive position, Maya continued issuing orders with calm precision. She directed the placement of additional obstacles to channel the enemy's approach, established fallback positions, and ensured their communications were synchronized with the broader defensive effort. Foster, the voice behind her, belonged to Specialist Wright, who had somehow made his way down from Outpost Delta in record time. Thought you could use an extra hand. The outpost? Automated surveillance is still running. I set it to relay directly to command. He gestured to the medical kit he carried. Figured my skills might be needed here. Maya nodded gratefully. Take position behind that wall section. You'll have cover and access to our position if we need medical support. With less than 2 minutes remaining before the expected assault, Maya gathered her small team for final instructions. The enemy expects minimal resistance at this breach point. They're planning to pour through here, then fan out to attack the rest of the perimeter from inside. Our job is to create such a devastating welcome that they're forced to redirect their assault elsewhere. She looked each soldier in the eye. Questions? Just one, Miller said with the gallows humor of a veteran. Why'd you keep those extra plates? Even Parker said you could ditch them. Maya touched the heavy plates she'd been forced to carry for 14 months. Because sometimes what's meant to break you can become your greatest strength. Before further discussion was possible, the radio crackled with urgent warnings. All positions, enemy force advancing on eastern perimeter. Multiple fighters, heavy weapons observed. This is it, Maya said calmly. Remember, let them commit to the approach before engaging. We want maximum concentration in the kill zone. Through her binoculars, she watched as the enemy fighters emerged from cover, approximately 400 meters from their position. They moved with the disciplined precision she'd observed earlier, professionals who knew their business and expected success. Hold, she ordered as her team tensed for action. Not yet. The enemy advance continued methodically. fighters moving in coordinated groups, covering each other's movements with practiced efficiency. At 300 meters, they paused briefly to assess the defenses, then continued their approach with renewed confidence. "Still holding," Maya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her system. "Let them commit fully." At 200 meters, the enemy force began to concentrate toward the breach point, exactly as she'd predicted. Their tactical lead had correctly identified it as the weakest point in the perimeter, and was directing the main assault force toward it. "Prepare claymores," she said to Miller, who readied the detonator. "Thompson, pick your targets. Priority on anyone with heavy weapons or who appears to be issuing orders." The enemy fighters reached the 150-meter mark, now moving more quickly as they approached what they believed was an inadequately defended position. Maya could see their confidence in their movement patterns, the subtle shift from cautious advance to committed assault. "On my mark," she said calmly. 3, 2, 1, now." Miller triggered the claymore mines simultaneously, creating a devastating wall of steel balls that tore through the front ranks of the enemy assault force. The carefully positioned mines caught the fighters in a triangulated kill zone, maximizing casualties and creating immediate chaos. "Engage!" Maya ordered, and Thompson opened fire from her elevated position, targeting enemy fighters who were attempting to reorganize after the initial shock. The defensive fire from their position was immediately supplemented by supporting fire from the main perimeter, creating interlocking fields of fire that made any approach to the breach point a deadly proposition. The enemy assault faltered momentarily as they absorbed the unexpected resistance, then regrouped with professional discipline. A second wave of fighters moved forward, using the terrain more effectively and deploying smoke grenades to obscure their approach. "They're adapting," Maya observed. "Shift fire to Sector 2. They'll try to flank from the east." As if to confirm her assessment, a group of enemy fighters appeared through the smoke, attempting to approach the breach from an oblique angle. Thompson adjusted her fire immediately, dropping 2 fighters before the others could find cover. The radio crackled with updates from other sectors. The northern feint had been repulsed, but enemy forces were now probing the western perimeter as well, stretching the defenders' resources. "They're testing for weaknesses," Maya told her team. "Stand by for increased pressure on our position." Quote, the prediction proved accurate as the enemy commander, realizing the direct approach was too costly, shifted tactics. The next attack came in the form of a concentrated RPG barrage aimed at their defensive position, followed by a rush of fighters attempting to exploit the confusion. "Cover!" Maya shouted as the first RPG impacted nearby, showering them with debris and momentarily disrupting their defensive fire. The second RPG struck closer, its explosion sending a spray of shrapnel across their position. Maya felt the impact as multiple fragments struck the extra plates she wore, the specially designed armor absorbing punishment that would have incapacitated or killed an unprotected soldier. Miller wasn't as fortunate. A piece of shrapnel caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him tumbling behind their makeshift barricade. "Man down!" Maya called to Wright, who immediately moved to provide medical assistance. With Miller wounded and the enemy pressing their advantage, the defensive position was in danger of being overrun. Maya made a split-second decision that would later be studied in tactical courses. Thompson maintained suppressive fire on the main approach. "Wright, get Miller stabilized and prepare to fall back to secondary position on my command." "What about you?" Wright asked, already working to stem the bleeding from Miller's wound. "I'm going to buy us some time." Before they could protest, Maya moved to an exposed section of the defensive position, dragging a damaged M240 machine gun that had been rendered inoperable by the RPG blast. To the enemy observers, it would appear she was attempting to bring additional firepower to bear on their approach. The ruse worked. Multiple enemy fighters shifted their focus to this new threat, directing concentrated fire at Maya's position. Bullets impacted around her, sending fragments of concrete flying in all directions. But Maya wasn't actually trying to operate the damaged weapon. Instead, she was drawing fire away from her team while simultaneously using her position to spot for the FOB's mortar team. "Fire control, this is Foster at breach point," she said into her radio, ducking lower as bullets continued to impact around her. "I need immediate mortar fire on these coordinates." She rattled off a precise set of numbers that would place high explosive rounds directly on the enemy's secondary assault force, which was massing for another push. Copy that, Foster. Mortar fire incoming. Danger close. Take cover. The warning was unnecessary. Maya was already moving back toward her team's position, the enemy fire following her retreat. As she dove behind the barricade, the first mortar rounds impacted with devastating accuracy, landing squarely among the enemy fighters who were preparing to rush the breach. The effect was immediate, confusion and casualties disrupting the enemy's assault momentum. Maya used the temporary reprieve to check on Miller's condition. "How bad?" she asked Wright, who was finishing a field dressing on the wounded sergeant's shoulder. "Through and through. He's stable but needs proper medical attention soon." Miller grimaced through the pain. "I can still shoot, Sergeant." "Save your strength. We're going to need it for the next wave." Maya turned to Thompson. "How's your ammunition?" "2 mags left for the primary, half a belt for the saw." Resources were dwindling rapidly, and the enemy, though momentarily disrupted, would reorganize for another assault. Maya knew they couldn't hold this position indefinitely without reinforcement. "Command, this is Foster at breach point," she radioed. "We've repulsed the initial assault but need immediate reinforcement. Enemy is regrouping for another push." Lieutenant Colonel Parker's voice came back immediately. "Foster, QRF is en route to your position. ETA 4 minutes. Can you hold?" Maya assessed their situation with ruthless honesty. Ammunition was low, 1 team member was wounded, and the enemy still had significant combat power to bring to bear. Under normal circumstances, the answer would be a clear negative. But these weren't normal circumstances. "We'll hold, sir." She turned to her team, determination evident in every line of her face. 4 minutes. We need to hold this position for 4 more minutes." "With what?" Thompson asked, gesturing to their depleted ammunition and damaged defenses. "They'll come with everything they have next time." Maya's hand went to the extra plate she carried, the burden that had been meant as punishment but had already saved her life once today. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the weight we're forced to carry becomes the shield that protects us when we need it most." An idea formed in her mind, unconventional, risky, but potentially decisive. Colonel Harrington had always taught that when conventional tactics fail, the unexpected becomes your greatest weapon. "Thompson, give me your remaining saw ammunition." "Right, help me with these plates." Working quickly, Maya detached several of the extra ballistic plates from her carrier. Using cord from their equipment, she secured the plates to create a makeshift shield, crude but effective against small arms fire. "What's the play, Sergeant?" Miller asked, watching her improvisation with professional interest, despite his wound. "They'll expect us to hunker down and conserve ammunition. Instead, we're going to force them to commit prematurely." She turned to Thompson. "When I move forward, I need you to wait until they focus on me, then deliver maximum fire on their command element. They're coordinating from behind that rock formation to the southeast." "That's at least 50 meters beyond the breach," Thompson protested. "You can't just walk out there." "I'm not walking, I'm running." Maya checked her sidearm and secured the makeshift shield. "Right? Be ready to provide covering fire for our fallback if this doesn't work." "And if it does work?" Wright asked. "Then Lieutenant Colonel Parker will have an interesting story to tell at his next command briefing." Before further objections could be raised, Maya keyed her radio one last time. "Command, this is Foster, executing tactical maneuver to disrupt enemy assault. Request supporting fire on my mark." "Foster, what are you?" Parker's voice cut off as Maya handed her radio to Wright. 3 minutes, she said simply. "That's all we need." With that, she moved to the edge of their defensive position, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the open. The enemy reaction was predictable. Immediate concentrated fire directed at this unexpected target. But Maya was already moving, using the makeshift shield to protect her vital areas, as she sprinted toward a position that offered both cover and a clear line of sight to the enemy's command element. Bullets impacted against the ballistic plates, the force of each hit resonating through her arms but failing to penetrate the composite material. What had been 20 pounds of punishment designed to break her spirit was now literally saving her life with each step. She reached the first position, a destroyed section of wall that provided momentary cover, and paused just long enough to signal Thompson. The corporal immediately opened fire on the enemy command position, her carefully aimed shots finding targets with professional precision. Maya continued her advance, moving from cover to cover in a zigzag pattern that made her a difficult target despite being in the open. Each move was calculated to draw enemy attention away from the breach point while simultaneously positioning herself for the decisive action. When she reached the final position, a drainage culvert that provided both concealment and fields of fire, she was less than 30 meters from the enemy's main assault force. From this vantage point, she could see their preparations for the final push that would overwhelm the defensive position. "Thompson, shift fire to my position on my mark," she radioed, using the comm unit she'd kept. 3, 2, 1, now. As Thompson's fire raked the area in front of her, Maya made her move. She sprinted directly toward the enemy's secondary command group, 3 fighters coordinating the next assault phase. The sheer audacity of the maneuver caught them completely by surprise. The first fighter went down before he could raise his weapon, Maya's precisely aimed shots finding their mark with lethal accuracy. The second managed to fire a burst that impacted against her shield, the force staggering her momentarily but failing to stop her advance. The third fighter, clearly the commander based on his equipment and positioning, reached for what Maya instantly recognized as a detonator, a secondary IED attack likely targeting the reinforcements that were en route. She didn't hesitate. 3 rapid shots dropped the commander before his finger could close on the trigger. "Command, this is Foster," she radioed, using the comm unit she'd taken from the fallen enemy commander. "Enemy command element neutralized. IED threat identified and contained. Request immediate QRF deployment to breach point." Parker's voice came back with uncharacteristic emotion. "Foster, QRF is 30 seconds out. Fall back to defensive position immediately." But Maya wasn't finished. From her new vantage point, she could see the enemy's fallback position, approximately 20 fighters setting up a support base for what would have been the final assault. They were still unaware that their command element had been neutralized. "Command, requesting immediate artillery on these coordinates." She transmitted the location of the enemy support position. "Danger close, but we need to end this now." There was a brief pause before Parker responded. "Artillery confirmed. Impact in 15 seconds. Get to cover, Foster. That's an order." Quote, Maya sprinted back toward the defensive position, her energy nearly spent but her determination undiminished. As she crossed the final stretch of open ground, the artillery impact behind her sent a shockwave that propelled her forward, the extra plates on her back absorbing shrapnel that would have shredded an unprotected soldier. She tumbled back into the defensive position just as the QRF arrived. 12 soldiers in full combat gear, led by a lieutenant who looked both impressed and confused to find the breach point still held by a 3-person team. "Secure the perimeter," Maya ordered, her voice hoarse from exertion but still carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "Enemy forces neutralized, but expect stragglers." The lieutenant hesitated only briefly before nodding in acknowledgement and deploying his team according to her instructions. The professionalism of the response suggested that word of her tactical authority had spread quickly throughout the command structure. Wright immediately moved to check her for injuries, his medical training overriding any concern for protocol. "That," he said as he examined a particularly nasty bruise forming on her shoulder where a bullet had struck the plate, "was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever seen." Colonel Harrington always said the difference between bravery and insanity is whether it works. Maya winced as he probed a particularly tender spot. "Did it work?" Wright gestured toward the perimeter, where the QRF was methodically securing the area and confirming that the enemy assault had indeed been broken. "I'd say it worked, but those plates, they should be compromised after taking that many hits." Maya examined the ballistic plates that had saved her life multiple times in the past 30 minutes. They were dented, scarred, and in one case partially shattered, but they had held. The weight she'd been forced to carry as punishment had become the shield that protected not just her, but her entire team. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "our greatest burdens become our greatest strengths. You just have to be willing to carry them long enough to find out how." The aftermath of the battle unfolded in a blur of activity, wounded being treated, defensive positions being reinforced, and a steady stream of reports confirming that the enemy force had been decisively defeated. Lieutenant Colonel Parker arrived at the breach point approximately 40 minutes after the fighting ended. His expression, an unusual mixture of anger, relief, and grudging admiration. "Sergeant Foster," he said, surveying the evidence of the fierce defense that had taken place. "I ordered you to hold this position, not to single-handedly charge an enemy command element." "With respect, sir, I assessed that a conventional defense would fail given our resources and the enemy's capabilities. Unconventional action was required." Parker studied her for a long moment, taking in the damaged plates she still wore, the evidence of the punishment that had inadvertently prepared her for this exact scenario. "Those plates," he said finally, "the ones Reynolds forced you to carry as conditioning, they saved your life today, didn't they?" "Yes, sir." "And the lives of my team." Parker nodded slowly, his expression shifting to one of decision rather than evaluation. "I made a call to Colonel Harrington this morning, after our conversation at Outpost Delta. She confirmed everything you told me about your training and the circumstances of your Ranger School failure." Maya said nothing, sensing that whatever came next would define the remainder of her military career. "She also shared something interesting," Parker continued. "Apparently, she's been documenting similar cases throughout the service. Qualified soldiers, especially women, whose careers were derailed by institutional bias or deliberate sabotage. Your case isn't unique, Foster. It's part of a pattern." "I suspected as much, sir." "What you might not have suspected is that the Secretary of the Army has ordered a comprehensive review of training and evaluation protocols, specifically focusing on cases like yours." Parker's expression hardened slightly. "Major Daniels, the officer who sabotaged your Ranger qualification, is currently facing a board of inquiry that will likely end his career. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.